Sometimes the moment that changes your life begins with a stranger who simply decides to stop. The rain had been falling for nearly an hour when Marcus Carter noticed the black Rolls-Royce resting at an awkward angle along the narrow shoulder of County Road 18. Not crashed, not destroyed, just wrong somehow, like a painting hanging crooked on a wall no one had bothered to fix. Marcus slowed his old pickup, windshield wipers pushing tired arcs across the glass. Out here, about 20 miles outside Cedar Ridge, the road cut through open fields and scattered pine trees. At this time of night, you could drive 10 miles and not see another car. Most people would have kept going. Marcus didn't. He eased the truck onto the gravel shoulder and killed the engine. The rain softened into a steady whisper against the metal roof. For a moment, he just sat there, hands resting on the wheel, looking at the expensive car ahead of him. Rolls-Royce. Even someone who had never owned anything fancier than a used pickup knew that shape. Whoever drove it probably didn't expect to be stranded on a dark country road. Marcus opened the door and stepped into the cool night air. His boots pressed into the damp gravel as he walked slowly toward the vehicle. The headlights were still on, casting long pale beams across the empty road. The driver's door was closed. The windows fogged slightly from the difference between warm air inside and cold rain outside. Marcus leaned carefully toward the glass and peered in. A woman sat in the driver's seat. Late 30s maybe. Dark hair pulled loosely back. Elegant coat. She looked completely still. Marcus tapped lightly on the window. No response. He tried again, a little firmer this time. "Ma'am." His voice stayed calm, steady. The way he spoke when his daughter woke from a nightmare. Still nothing. Marcus moved around to the driver's door and gently tried the handle. It opened. Inside the car, the air smelled faintly of leather and rain. The woman's head leaned slightly toward the window, eyes closed, breathing slow and quiet. Marcus immediately crouched beside the open door. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No movement, but her breathing was steady. That was good. He glanced quickly across the dashboard. No smoke, no damage, no sign of anything violent or alarming. Just a luxury car. Stopped on the wrong road at the wrong time. Marcus slipped off his old canvas jacket and folded it carefully, sliding it between the door frame and the woman's shoulder so her head wouldn't rest against the cold glass. He moved slowly, respectfully, the way you would help someone who trusted you without knowing your name. The woman remained still, but behind her closed eyelids, Charlotte Whitmore was listening to every word, every movement. She had not lost consciousness in the accident earlier that evening. The sudden slide on the wet pavement had startled her, but the car had stopped safely. No injuries, no real damage. But Charlotte had made a decision in that quiet moment afterward. She closed her eyes and stayed still. Because Charlotte Whitmore, billionaire CEO of Whitmore Holdings, had spent the last 15 years surrounded by people who only approached her when they knew exactly who she was. Tonight she wanted to know something different. She wanted to know what a stranger would do if they thought she was just a woman alone on the side of a dark road. Marcus Carter reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed 911 calmly. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm out on County Road 18. Looks like someone slid off the shoulder. Driver's breathing, but not responding. You might want to send an ambulance, just to be safe." He ended the call and knelt beside the car again, rain tapping softly around them. Then he said something Charlotte did not expect to hear. Something simple, something honest, something that made her heart pause behind those closed eyes. "You're all right, ma'am," Marcus said gently, as if speaking to someone already awake. "I'll stay right here until help gets here." The rain continued to fall in a quiet, patient rhythm, tapping against the roof of the Rolls-Royce and the hood of Marcus Carter's old pickup parked behind it. Marcus remained kneeling beside the open driver's door, one hand resting lightly against the frame so the wind would not push it closed. He had learned a long time ago that sometimes the most important thing you could do for someone was simply stay. Charlotte Whitmore felt the weight of that presence even with her eyes closed. She had expected movement by now. A search through her purse. A glance at the diamond watch resting on her wrist. Maybe. Even a moment of hesitation followed by a quiet decision to leave. Instead, the man beside her did none of those things. Marcus shifted slightly, careful not to disturb her, and looked down the empty road stretching into darkness. The ambulance dispatcher had said help would arrive in about 15 minutes. Out here that was considered fast. He reached up and gently brushed a few drops of rain from Charlotte's sleeve where the door had left her exposed to the weather. "You picked a rough spot to slide off the road tonight," he said softly, not expecting a reply. His voice carried the relaxed warmth of someone used to speaking calmly in uncertain moments. Charlotte listened closely. His tone did not carry urgency or impatience, just quiet concern. Marcus leaned back slightly against the door frame and looked up at the gray clouds drifting across the night sky. "My daughter hates storms like this," he continued, half speaking to the rain itself. "She says the sky sounds like it is thinking too hard." He gave a small quiet chuckle. Kids say things like that. Charlotte felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Most conversations around her involved numbers, contracts, negotiations, or strategies. This man was sitting beside a stranger on a dark road talking about the way his daughter described the sky. Marcus glanced toward the woman again, studying her breathing carefully. Still slow, still steady. He reached toward the center console and gently turned off the headlights so they would not drain the battery while they waited. The road faded into deeper darkness, lit only by the soft reflection of rain on asphalt and the distant glow from Marcus's truck. Charlotte noticed the way he moved through the car. Careful, respectful. He did not touch anything that did not need touching. He did not search. He did not look curious about her belongings. He simply made sure the car was safe and stepped back out into the rain again. Marcus pulled a small flashlight from his pocket and placed it on the dashboard, pointing upward so a soft light filled the interior without shining in her eyes. "There," he murmured gently, "just in case you wake up confused." Charlotte felt the smallest tightening in her throat. It had been years since someone had done something considerate without expecting recognition. Marcus sat down carefully on the edge of the door frame, rain mist gathering on his shoulders. After a moment he spoke again, quieter this time. "You are doing all right," he said. "Just breathe slow." He paused, then added words he believed she would never hear. "If my little girl was ever stuck out here like this, I would hope someone would stop for her too." Charlotte Whitmore had built companies worth billions of dollars. She had negotiated deals across 3 continents and commanded rooms filled with powerful executives. Yet in that quiet moment on a rainy country road, it was a simple sentence from a stranger that unsettled her the most. Because he had not stopped for a billionaire. He had stopped for someone's daughter. The minutes passed slowly beneath the steady rain, each second stretching into the quiet rhythm of water tapping against metal and asphalt. Marcus Carter remained seated beside the open driver door, one boot resting on the gravel while the other balanced against the edge of the pavement. He checked his phone once, mostly out of habit. 12 minutes since he called for help. Out here that meant the ambulance would probably arrive soon. Charlotte Whitmore continued to lie still in the seat, her breathing steady, her eyes closed. Yet her mind had become sharper with every word the stranger had spoken. She had expected curiosity, maybe even nervousness once the man realized the car he had approached cost more than most houses in Cedar Ridge. Instead, Marcus seemed almost indifferent to the luxury around him. To him, it was simply a vehicle that needed to stay dry and a driver who needed someone nearby. Marcus leaned forward slightly and adjusted the flashlight again so the beam softened against the dashboard. The gentle glow made the inside of the car feel calmer, less like an abandoned machine and more like a quiet room waiting for morning. "You are probably wondering what happened," he said softly, speaking the way someone might speak to a patient waking from a long nap. "Roads get tricky when rain comes down like this. Happens faster than people expect." He paused and listened to the distant sound of wind passing through the pine trees. Somewhere farther down the road a truck moved along the highway, its tires humming faintly through the night. Then silence returned. Marcus rested his hands loosely together and looked out into the darkness again. "Ambulance should be here soon," he said gently. "They will check you out, make sure everything is fine." Charlotte felt a strange tension behind her ribs. She had spent years building walls around herself, layers of professionalism and distance that kept every interaction controlled. Yet the quiet patience of this man was slowly pressing against those walls without even trying. Marcus shifted again when a small gust of wind carried rain into the open doorway. Without hesitation, he removed his worn baseball cap and placed it carefully along the edge of the door frame to block the droplets from reaching Charlotte's face. It was a small action, automatic, the kind of gesture that usually went unnoticed. Charlotte noticed it immediately. Marcus rubbed his hands together for warmth and glanced once more at the road behind him where his old pickup sat, with its parking lights glowing softly through the rain. Inside that truck, a folded booster seat rested in the back row, waiting for the next morning school drive. Marcus spoke again after a moment, his voice thoughtful. "My little girl has this habit," he said quietly. "Every time we pass someone pulled over on the road, she asks the same question." He smiled faintly to himself. She says, "Daddy, did anyone stop to help them yet?" Charlotte felt something shift in her chest again. Marcus continued, unaware of the effect his words were having. "Kids believe the world works that way," he said. "They think if someone is stuck, somebody else will stop." He looked down briefly at the woman resting in the seat beside him. "I try real hard not to prove her wrong." For the first time since closing her eyes after the accident, Charlotte Whitmore felt the steady certainty of her decision begin to waver. The rain softened slightly, falling now in long quiet threads that shimmered under the faint glow of Marcus Carter's truck lights behind them. The road remained empty, stretching through fields and pine trees that whispered whenever the wind passed through. Marcus glanced once more down the highway, then back toward the woman resting in the driver's seat. The calm rise and fall of her breathing reassured him she was stable, but he stayed close anyway. Waiting never bothered him. Life had trained him for patience long before this moment. Charlotte Whitmore lay perfectly still, yet inside her thoughts had grown restless. Every instinct told her she should open her eyes now, reveal herself, end the test she had created. Yet something about the quiet sincerity of the man beside her held her there. Marcus shifted slightly and leaned his elbow against the door frame, careful not to jostle the seat. The flashlight cast a soft circle of light across the dashboard, reflecting gently against the polished wood trim of the luxury car. He studied the interior without curiosity, only making sure nothing had come loose during the slide off the road. Then his attention returned to the woman. "You are doing fine," he said quietly, the same calm tone he had used since the beginning. "Just keep breathing slow." Charlotte felt the words settle around her like a blanket. They were simple, almost ordinary. Yet there was something steady inside them that felt unfamiliar in her world of calculated conversations and careful intentions. Marcus tilted his head slightly as he listened to the distant sound of approaching tires somewhere far down the highway. For a moment he thought it might be the ambulance, but the noise faded away again, leaving only the sound of rain and wind. He let out a slow breath and rubbed the back of his neck. "Storms like this remind me of when my daughter was younger," he said softly. "She used to count the seconds between lightning and thunder like it was some kind of game." He smiled faintly at the memory. She would sit by the window and say the sky was talking. Charlotte felt a quiet warmth in those words. She imagined a small child sitting in a dim living room, listening to thunder with curiosity instead of fear. Marcus continued speaking in the same gentle rhythm, unaware that every word was reaching her. "Kids see things different," he said. "They believe people are mostly good." He looked down briefly at the woman resting beside him, then back out at the dark road. "I guess I try to live in a way that proves them right." Charlotte felt a small tightening in her chest. For years she had assumed kindness always came with expectations. Every favor in her world carried a contract, even when the paperwork remained invisible. Yet this stranger had been sitting in the rain beside her for nearly 20 minutes with nothing to gain. Marcus reached forward and gently adjusted the folded jacket beneath her shoulder again so it stayed comfortable. The movement was careful, respectful, almost protective. "Help is coming," he said quietly. "Just hold on a little longer." Charlotte's mind raced now. The test she had designed had been meant to reveal opportunists, not this quiet kind of integrity. For the first time since closing her eyes, she felt uncertainty about what she might discover if she opened them. The rain had nearly faded into a soft mist by the time Marcus Carter heard the distant sound of tires approaching through the darkness. At first it was only a faint hum carried by the wind across the open fields. Then slowly the sound grew stronger, steady and mechanical against the quiet rhythm of the night. Marcus lifted his head and looked down the road again, eyes narrowing slightly as two small points of light appeared far away between the pine trees. "That should be them," he said gently, mostly to himself. The ambulance lights were still too far away to flash red across the clouds, but the movement was unmistakable. Help was finally coming. Charlotte Whitmore heard the sound as well. The low vibration of the engine rolled across the pavement and through the body of the car. Her moment of silence was ending whether she was ready or not. For nearly half an hour she had remained motionless, listening to the stranger who had stopped beside her on an empty country road. And in all that time he had never once asked who she was. Marcus rose slowly to his feet and stepped away from the door, stretching his back after sitting so long in the rain. His jacket still rested carefully beneath Charlotte's shoulder, his cap still shielding the doorway from the drifting mist. He looked down at the woman once more to make sure she was still breathing steadily. "You made it through the hard part," he said softly. "Just a few more minutes now." Charlotte felt the words settle around her again, simple and sincere. No performance, no expectation, just quiet reassurance from someone who believed it mattered. The approaching headlights grew brighter, reflecting across the wet asphalt and glimmering against the chrome edge of the Rolls-Royce. Marcus stepped toward the center of the road and raised his arms slightly so the driver would see where the car had slid off the shoulder. The ambulance slowed as it reached him, tires crunching gently across the gravel before stopping beside the scene. The rear doors opened and two paramedics stepped out carrying equipment bags and a small portable light. Marcus spoke calmly as they approached. "Driver slid off the road in the rain," he explained. "She has been breathing steady but has not responded yet." One of the paramedics nodded and moved carefully toward the open door. Charlotte heard their footsteps, their quiet voices, the soft clink of medical tools. The moment she had delayed was now standing directly in front of her. For the first time since the accident, she slowly opened her eyes. The interior light from the flashlight reflected softly against the windshield as her vision adjusted. The first face she saw was not the paramedics leaning in beside the door. It was Marcus Carter standing a few feet away in the rain, watching quietly to make sure everything was under control. He looked relieved when he saw her eyes open. Not surprised, not curious, just relieved. "There you go," he said with a small nod, as if this outcome had always been certain. Charlotte studied him for a brief moment before speaking, her voice calm but thoughtful. "You stayed." Marcus gave a small shrug, water dripping from the brim of his cap. "Seemed like the right thing to do." Charlotte Whitmore sat quietly in the driver's seat as the paramedic knelt beside her, checking her pulse and shining a small penlight briefly near her eyes. The soft beam passed quickly and the paramedic nodded with quiet approval. "Your breathing looks good," he said calmly. "Did you hit your head when the car slid off the road?" Charlotte shook her head slowly. "No," she answered, her voice steady but thoughtful. "The road was wet. The car lost traction for a moment." The second paramedic checked the dashboard and the steering column, making sure nothing inside the vehicle had shifted dangerously. Outside, Marcus Carter stood a few feet away, giving them space while the rain continued to fade into a light mist. The paramedic helped Charlotte sit a little straighter and wrapped a warm emergency blanket around her shoulders, even though she did not appear injured. It was standard procedure on a cool night like this. "We would still like to take you to the hospital just to be safe," he explained. Charlotte nodded once, but her eyes drifted toward Marcus again. He had stepped back toward his truck now, standing near the open door with quiet patience, as if his part in the night was already finished. Charlotte studied him for a moment. His clothes were damp from the rain. His jacket was still inside the car beneath her shoulder where he had placed it earlier. Yet he showed no sign of hurry or expectation. The paramedic noticed her glance and followed it toward the man standing near the pickup. "Is he with you?" he asked. Charlotte paused before answering. "No," she said softly. "He just stopped." The paramedic gave a small nod, clearly familiar with moments like this. People helping strangers on long roads was not unusual in rural counties. Charlotte carefully stepped out of the car with the paramedic's assistance. Her shoes touched the wet pavement, and the cool night air wrapped around her shoulders beneath the blanket. The Rolls-Royce sat quietly beside them, its polished surface reflecting the ambulance lights that now flashed softly against the mist. Marcus noticed her standing and walked a few steps closer, though he remained respectfully outside the circle of the paramedic's work. "Looks like you are all right," he said with an easy tone. Charlotte nodded once. "Yes," she replied. "Thanks to you." Marcus shook his head lightly. "Roadside calls happen all the time," he said. "I just happened to be the one driving by." Charlotte watched him carefully, studying the quiet simplicity in his words. He was not waiting for gratitude. He was not asking questions. To him the night was already moving toward its natural end. The paramedic finished a few final notes on his tablet and glanced between them. "We will transport her to Cedar Ridge Medical just to be cautious," he said. Marcus nodded politely. "Good place," he replied. "They will take good care of you." Charlotte pulled the blanket slightly tighter around her shoulders as she continued watching him. "You never asked my name," she said suddenly. Marcus gave a small, thoughtful smile. "Did not seem important," he answered. "You needed help." That was enough. For a brief moment the night grew very quiet around them. The rain had stopped completely now. Only the distant sound of wind moving through the trees remained. The paramedics finished securing their equipment as the back doors of the ambulance opened with a soft metallic click. One of them gently motioned toward the vehicle. "We will take you over to Cedar Ridge Medical for a quick evaluation," he said calmly. "It is only about 12 miles from here." Charlotte Whitmore nodded slowly, but she did not move right away. Instead, she looked again toward Marcus Carter, who was standing beside his old pickup truck with the same quiet patience he had shown since the moment he stopped on the road. The flashing lights from the ambulance reflected across the wet pavement and briefly illuminated his face. There was no urgency in his expression, no expectation, just the calm understanding of someone who believed the situation was already resolved. Charlotte took a few steps toward him, the emergency blanket resting around her shoulders as the cool night air settled across the road. The mist had cleared and the clouds were beginning to thin, revealing a faint line of stars above the pine trees. Marcus noticed her approach and gave a polite nod. "Looks like they have everything under control now," he said. Charlotte studied him carefully for a moment. "You stayed the entire time," she replied. Marcus shrugged slightly. Did not seem right to leave. Charlotte allowed a small, thoughtful smile to appear. Most people would have. Marcus considered that for a moment, then shook his head gently. "Maybe," he said, "but I keep thinking about something my daughter says." Charlotte tilted her head slightly, curious despite herself. Marcus rested one hand against the side of his truck as he spoke. "She is 9 years old," he explained. "And every time we drive past someone stopped on the side of the road, she asks the same question." He paused briefly before continuing. "She asks if someone already stopped to help them." Charlotte listened closely. Marcus continued with the quiet certainty that had marked every word he spoke that night. "I try to live in a way that lets me tell her yes." For a moment, the only sound between them was the faint hum of the ambulance engine idling behind Charlotte. The paramedics waited respectfully nearby, giving her a few minutes before the short trip to the hospital. Charlotte looked down the empty road, then back toward Marcus again. The simplicity of his answer carried more weight than any speech she had heard in years. "You never asked who I was," she said again, almost as if the thought still puzzled her. Marcus smiled faintly. "Did not think it mattered much," he replied. "You were just someone who needed help." Charlotte felt something shift quietly inside her. For most of her life, people had approached her because of her name, her company, or the influence attached to both. Yet this man had sat in the rain beside her car for nearly 30 minutes without even trying to learn her identity. One of the paramedics stepped forward again, offering a gentle reminder. "We should head out soon, ma'am." Charlotte nodded, then turned back toward Marcus one last time. "Thank you," she said simply. Marcus gave another small nod in return. "Safe trip to the hospital," he replied. Charlotte stepped toward the ambulance door, but paused before climbing inside. She looked back once more at the man standing beside the pickup truck beneath the clearing sky. For reasons she could not fully explain, she knew the quiet moment on that dark road was not the end of their story. The ambulance doors closed with a quiet thud, sealing Charlotte Whitmore inside the softly lit interior as the vehicle began to move slowly down the dark country road. The flashing red lights faded across the wet pavement behind them, casting brief reflections on the trees before disappearing around the bend. Inside the ambulance, the ride was smooth and steady. One paramedic sat across from Charlotte, occasionally checking the monitor clipped gently to her finger while the other spoke quietly with the driver through the small window. Charlotte leaned back against the seat, the emergency blanket still resting around her shoulders, but her attention remained somewhere else entirely. Her mind kept returning to the image of the man standing beside that old pickup truck under the clearing sky. Marcus Carter. She realized she had never even heard his name. He had simply been a stranger who stopped. A stranger who stayed. The paramedic glanced up from his notes and offered a polite smile. "You were lucky someone came along so quickly," he said. Charlotte nodded slowly. "Yes, she replied softly. I was. Outside the ambulance windows, the dark fields of Cedar Ridge rolled quietly past beneath a sky that was finally clearing. Small farmhouses appeared now and then along the road, their porch lights glowing warmly in the distance. Charlotte watched those lights pass by one after another while her thoughts replayed the past hour with unusual clarity. The calm voice in the rain, the jacket placed beneath her shoulder, the cap shielding her from the drizzle. None of those gestures had been performed for recognition. None of them carried any sign that Marcus expected something in return. The paramedic finished writing his report and looked up again. Your vehicle will be towed to the county lot for the night, he explained. You can arrange pickup once the roads dry out. Charlotte nodded again, but her thoughts remained fixed on a different detail. Marcus had never asked her name. He had not searched her car. He had not looked through her purse or checked the documents inside the glove compartment. In a world where nearly every introduction came with calculation, that kind of restraint felt almost unfamiliar. Meanwhile, back on the quiet road where the accident had happened, Marcus Carter climbed back into his pickup truck and started the engine. The headlights cut across the empty pavement where the Rolls-Royce had rested earlier. The storm clouds had moved east now, leaving the air cool and still. Marcus sat behind the wheel for a moment before pulling onto the road. The booster seat in the back shifted slightly as the truck rolled forward, reminding him of the early morning routine waiting at home. School lunches to pack. Homework to check. A 9-year-old girl who would probably ask the same question she asked every time he returned late from work. Marcus smiled faintly to himself as he drove through the quiet countryside. Somewhere in the distance the ambulance lights had already disappeared. Yet the small moment they shared on that dark road lingered in the silence of the night, carrying a quiet feeling neither of them fully understood yet. The ambulance reached Cedar Ridge Medical just after midnight, its tires rolling quietly across the smooth hospital driveway before coming to a gentle stop beneath the covered entrance. The rear doors opened and cool night air drifted inside as the paramedics guided Charlotte Whitmore carefully down onto the pavement. The hospital lobby lights glowed softly through the glass doors ahead, casting a warm reflection across the polished floor inside. Charlotte stepped forward slowly, the emergency blanket still wrapped loosely around her shoulders, though she no longer felt cold. Her mind remained far away from the hospital corridor and the quiet routine of medical checks waiting inside. She could still see the image of a man standing beside a pickup truck beneath a clearing sky, rainwater dripping from the brim of his cap, as if the moment meant nothing unusual at all. A nurse greeted her calmly at the entrance and led her toward a small examination room where a doctor completed a brief evaluation. The process was simple and careful. A few questions, a quick check of her reflexes and balance. Within half an hour the doctor confirmed what Charlotte already knew. Everything looks stable, he said kindly. You were fortunate tonight. Charlotte nodded slowly as she stood from the examination chair. Yes, she replied softly. I was. Meanwhile across town, Marcus Carter pulled his pickup truck into the gravel driveway of a small 2-bedroom house near the edge of Cedar Ridge. The porch light glowed warmly against the quiet night, and the faint sound of a television drifted through the living room window. Marcus shut off the engine and sat for a moment before stepping out of the truck. The night air felt cooler now that the rain had passed. Inside the house, a small pair of footsteps moved quickly across the floor before the front door opened. A young girl with bright, curious eyes looked up at him. Daddy, she said with relief in her voice. You are home late. Marcus smiled gently and stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Had to stop and help someone on the road, he explained. The girl tilted her head thoughtfully, the same question already forming in her mind. Did anyone stop to help them? Marcus knelt slightly so he could meet her eyes at the same level. He brushed a bit of rain from her hair and gave a quiet nod. Yes, he said softly. Someone did. The girl smiled, satisfied with the answer, and ran back toward the couch where her homework waited. Marcus stood there for a moment watching her before switching off the porch light and settling into the quiet rhythm of the night at home. Across town, Charlotte Whitmore stepped out of Cedar Ridge Medical just as a sleek black sedan arrived to pick her up. The driver opened the door respectfully, but Charlotte paused before entering the car. She looked out across the empty parking lot beneath the clear sky. Somewhere beyond the trees, And quiet roads of Cedar Ridge was a small house where a man who never asked her name had returned to his ordinary life. Charlotte stood there for a moment longer before finally stepping into the waiting car. Yet one thought remained steady in her mind as the vehicle pulled away from the hospital. Sometimes the most powerful moment in a person's life arrives quietly, carried by a stranger who simply chooses to stop.